We're broadcasting from the unceded Coast Salish territories on Turtle Island. A shout out to all the programmers who, along with you listeners, keep this community radio alive, producing alternative media often ignored by the mainstream media conglomerates. We are tuned into Buland Awaz and then followed on The Rational on CFRO 100.5 FM. Buland Awaz and The Rational are Vancouver's original choice for authentic public affairs from a people of color perspective. For over 3 decades, we've been hosting 2 hours of critical discussion on relevant issues weekly on Mondays at this time. Thank you, listeners, for your continued generous sponsorship for this show. Today on The Rational, we'll have a listen to Dalia Al-Masri's remarks to the Vancouver School Board and clips on solidarity with Palestine. We'll be speaking with Jeff Berner on anniversaries and refrigerators, and also we'll be speaking with Fiona York about the TentCity injunctions and a fundraiser. But coming up first, we'll be speaking with Sarah Abbas, Executive Director at Umano, and they have a festival that they've curated, which will be online from December the 5th. It's the Umano International Short Film Festival, which features over 25 short films selected from over 400 submissions from 71 countries. We will come right back with all of this. Stay tuned. So Fiona York is one of the folks that are working in a way to create the safe space that we have with campers. And at the same time, the city seems to, through the Parks Board, seems to be completely at odds with caring for people that have no places to go and are together helping and creating shelter for themselves. Fiona, what is going to be happening very, very soon with the courts? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So with the court action, this is actually directly an engagement with the Park Board, but I would say that it's not only the city and the park, but it's also the province now that is fighting hard against the whole issue of encampments. And it seems like their idea of addressing homelessness is simply to ensure that encampments don't exist and sweep them away. And, you know, that obviously that's something that draws a lot of visibility and attention, and actually, in some ways, forces the province and the city to access the funding and to get housing built and to open up more units, because they're driven to close encampments and to find housing so that people in encampments are no longer as visible reminder of homelessness. So back in spring of this year, this province and the city and the Park Board all signed a memorandum of understanding, which was really framed around the idea of preventing encampments forever happening again in the future in the city of Vancouver. So obviously that's something that's quite damaging, because even though it's in this context that the onus is to provide suitable spaces so that encampments don't need to exist, it's really being pursued in this enforcement forward approach, which is all about preventing encampments and kind of ignoring the obligation to provide housing so that encampments aren't needed at all to provide suitable housing. And then on top of that, we have a bylaw that was passed by the Park Board last summer about overnight sheltering, but just making it, it sounds on the surface like a good thing to have overnight sheltering that's allowed by a bylaw, but the bylaw is so onerous and has so many restrictions that actually makes things very difficult. And one really concrete example of that is right now Oppenheimer Park, which has always been a site of people staying for years and years and years, obviously encampment after encampment, but also just people staying overnight and sheltering, one-off people sheltering when they need to, is now entirely closed to overnight sheltering because it simply doesn't meet any of the tests for eligibility in that bylaw. So it's actually made things worse, not better. And then thirdly, the Park Board took it upon themselves to pass orders saying that no sheltering is allowed in CrabPark at all, which would mean that it's taking 1 and 2 and even 3 Downtown Eastside parks entirely off the map for people to be able to shelter in. Strathcona has been closed. Oppenheimer is out of the limits of the bylaw. And then CrabPark has 2 orders against it saying that people can't shelter at all, which is actually contrary to the charter that says that if there's not suitable spaces, people should not be criminalized from staying in a park. And yet here are these orders being written and signed by the general manager of the park board saying that you can't shelter in CrabPark at all. And that would close off the 3rd park that's really available in the Downtown Eastside where people want to be so they can access their clinics and their health care and their laundry and showers and meals and their friends and family and all of those things that people need to be near to. So it's a really damaging move that has happened from the park board, but it's being supported by the province and the city as well. So now what the park board has done in further to the 2 orders is, because they tried to enforce these orders and were not really successful because people held space and pushed back and the community supported people staying in the park for all the reasons that I explained. So now the park board has taken the move of seeking an injunction. This was actually allowed by the board of the park board, passed a motion back in August that they would be allowed to seek an injunction if need be. So they could have tried to seek this injunction, a couple of months ago. But in actual fact, what happened was that residents of the park, who are quite aware and good advocates for themselves, actually retained a lawyer back in September and filed a petition to set aside those orders that I mentioned would prevent sheltering at all in the park. So we ended up with having 2 court cases. One of them is the one that residents of the park initiated, saying that those 2 orders are not constitutional and should be set aside. And secondly, the one the park board initiated, seeking the courts to grant an injunction to clear the park. So those 2 court cases are now head-to-head, and they ended up getting scheduled for this week, December 2nd and 3rd, and they'll be heard in the BC Supreme Court on Thursday and Friday.
Wow. Well, best luck with that. It's really going to be. I don't know how to say it. It cuts both ways. In some ways, it's ahead, and it will lead to other things, and hopefully bring some clarity around the issue. Fiona, can you let listeners know also about the efforts to fundraise and where and sort of where and how the different ways that folks can go about helping out?
Sure, and thank you for bringing that up. So right now there are people who've been sheltering in CrabPark for about 6 months, and obviously conditions are quite difficult at the moment, like they are all over the province. And obviously there's need, and it's really a lot of challenges right now. But in the park, there are about 35 people, and there's ongoing need for many things to support people who are sleeping outside. So there's survival needs, which is just things like bottled water, and we have a lot of groups and organizations that provide meals and support for food security, and residents also participate in ensuring that there are meals. So people who are staying at the camp obviously help a lot with their neighbors and with the community there, and ensuring that there is food security and all of these resources. But we're asking people to help with things like the bottled water, the food security, and then the survival gear. So now we're going into the cold, wet weather, and we're always asking for donations of tents and tarps, which are really essential at this time. Insulated tarps as well are really helpful, and they're a little bit more expensive, so they're harder to come by. There's also things around court support, so because there's a lot of organizing that's needed. We had a rally last week, and we've got one coming up this week. So just all of the costs around the court support, so doing things like sound systems and transportation, and in facilitating residents to participate in those events and any other events that might come up, because there may be other public actions that take place as well. So all of those costs around the court support, and then just the survival gear, the winter weather, the day-to-day operations, and kind of infrastructure of the camp that are needed all the time just to support people to survive at all, staying outdoors, but also particularly at this time when the weather conditions are so challenging. One thing that has been really, really difficult, kind of a major thing we're dealing with right now, is because one of the many kind of regressive actions of the park board has been that they fenced off a portion of the park where the camp is, meaning that people have been confined to a very small area to walk around in. And of course, those areas have got very, very muddy because we have about 35 people who are kind of confined to a very narrow path. So there's a lot of mud, and it's very wet, and it's very difficult to walk on. We've made many requests for gravel and bark mulch and sandbags. None of those have been responded to. So again, we're sort of relying on the community for those kind of support, which is like so basic. It's just so people don't slip and fall and can actually move around on the soggy grass and in the mud. So just some of those supports are also very helpful. And then there's things like flashlights and batteries and headlamps and all of those sort of ongoing costs. So that's some of our major fundraiser. And then, of course, we're also going into the holidays. And so we'd like to provide a Christmas meal and make the holidays a little bit more special. We're asking for cash donations, but also for in-kind donations of any of those items that I've mentioned, tarps and sleeping bags and warm things, hand warmers and scarves, mitts, hats, blankets, sleeping bags. All of those things are always extremely welcome. And at the rally this week on Thursday at the courthouse, we're actually going to ask people to bring those items. And we're also, we recently got a Christmas tree donated, so we'll be decorating and just making things a little bit, given that it's so difficult and challenging right now, just sort of trying to make it a little bit more bright for the holidays. But also there's requests from our residents to do a toy drive as well, because in the community in the Downtown Eastside and with people that I've met staying in camp, there's a very vast majority of people who have children and families, and so the residents wanted to be able to give back and kind of thank some people for all the support that's been provided to the camp and show that it's not just a one-way street, and that they'd like to give back as well. So there's requests for new toys and gifts as well that can be given to families in the community.
So listeners can get more information if they're on Facebook. If you search for Christmas Court Support for CrabPark, it's a fundraiser for our friend Fiona York. Fiona, can you talk to us a little bit more about the relations between the neighborhood and those that are in camp there?
I think, and I could talk about CrabPark itself. So as you know, CrabPark has a really interesting history and was started because the community demonstrated and demanded a park for the Downtown Eastside back in the 80s, and actually was founded because of a camp on that site. If you pass over the overpass over Main Street, you'll see a plaque on one of the poles there that tells the story of a tent encampment that was in 1982, I think, that ended up generating enough support that the park was established. So CrabPark has this kind of community history and sort of protest history. And then, of course, we know it also has an Indigenous history as a landing place for groups coming over from the North Shore, strong environmental background as well, with having one of the only freshwater marshes, which is a landing place for birds and like a wetland for birds who are coming over the seawater, the saltwater. And also then it has been the site of the call for the healing center for the Downtown Eastside for many years, for over a decade as well. And the people who are staying in the park currently are very respectful of that history and understand that history and that really strong connection to the community and what that means. And and that it's also a sacred site in a lot of ways and very meaningful in the Indigenous community. Recently, around that march that I mentioned, there were 215 seedlings that were planted in commemoration of the 215 children's lives that were lost in Kamloops. And so there's a lot of respect for that significant history, long-standing history of the park. So there is a good relationship with the community and the neighborhood. And again, many people choose to stay in CrabPark because it is there aren't suitable spaces to go to, and people do need to be close to those important resources, which are important for anyone, but particularly when you have barriers or limited in terms of transportation or access, and need to be able to access some low-cost services, housing outreach, healthcare needs, clinics, and of course the friends and family that provide support, particularly when you don't have internet or phone or other means to communicate. So there's that kind of important significance of the actual location of CrabPark in the context of the Downtown Eastside and that location, but also that ongoing historical importance of the park as well.
Thank you, Fiona. And listeners can also get more information on Facebook by just typing in CrabPark Injunction Hearing. It's an event that's going to be on the 2nd of December, Thursday at 10 a.m. at the BC Courthouse. Fiona, sometimes we talk about settler colonialism in such abstract ways, but this really is it on the ground, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say that like so many encampments and in the homelessness community, there is the ongoing overrepresentation because of the colonial history of Indigenous people in so many of the encampments that we see, not just in Vancouver, but the Lower Mainland and all over the province of BC. And for this, and it's particularly an issue because, of course, these are all unceded lands, and CrabPark has, again, that historical connection with Indigenous peoples and it's in unceded territory, and yet still there is the effort to displace and evict people from these lands, even if they are people from the host nations or Indigenous people who have that entitlement and right to be on the land. So it's the same kind of story and same thing that we see in so many places and so many issues in society, and so often in homelessness. And again, all over the province of BC, there is the context as well that encampments are something that are not just in Vancouver, but are all over the country. Recently in the news, there was the takedown of the two encampments in Hamilton that was particularly brutal. And earlier in the summer, that happened in Montreal and Halifax and Toronto. More recently, closer to home, there's the encampment in Prince George, and it's known as Moccasin Flats because it's about 80% Indigenous. Now, they recently went through a court injunction as well back in September, October. They were actually successful in that the city was not awarded the right to have an injunction against that TentCity, and that was really historical, like a major milestone, very dramatic win for the encampment. And we've been in close contact and touch with the organizers and residents there. Actually were able to meet with them. We had a video call between the two camps and express our solidarity back and forth with each other because the fight is so similar and so many similarities. And the theme of colonialism runs throughout that. We have been supported by groups like the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, who did provide an open letter of support and solidarity for the camp, and other groups like the BC Assembly of First Nations, just making it known that it's so irresponsible and so inexcusable to be evicting Indigenous people from their own land.
It's like a no-brainer, huh? It's crazy that we're still here. Fiona, maybe let listeners know some of the other, you've already talked about this, but how are folks responding? What are some of the ways that you feel folks can still respond, help out. There's money, of course. It's easy to do that. There's items that you need. There's a whole list of that. Where else do you think that you talked about gravel as well? I mean, you never know where people get stuff from. There's a Christmas dinner. What about heat and heating and things like that? I mean, what are some of the logistical things that you're running into? You already did talk about some of the things, flashlights and things, but what else?
Yeah, and so actually other ways where people can get information about how they can help out. So there's the Facebook, which is Friends with CCAP, and there's also a Twitter account, which is CrabPark Encampment. And there is also an Instagram account called No Gentle, where a lot of this information and updates are being posted, and press releases and lists and action items are being shared. So we've asked people, of course, to provide cash donations or in-kind donations, and not everyone has the capacity to do that. So even just sharing some of that information, and like you said, you never know where people can source some of these unlikely items like gravel and bark mulch, and so sometimes people just have access to some of the like hardware needs and things like that. So just passing things like that on is really helpful, or just again sharing and publicizing some of those needs and wishes. There's also letter writing. There's a petition that's being circulated that's going to the park board that's specifically around the injunction and not seeking the injunction. And there's some letter writing. And then also we've asked people to take an action, which is calling 311, which is the city and park board information line, and saying that they don't want the rangers to seek an injunction for CrabPark. Often the rangers they say that they're driven by the complaints process, and so if they get complaints about something that's happening in a park, then they're going to go there and respond to that. And so sort of trying to like counter that and go the other way is to complain that they're seeking an injunction and hoping that they respond to that and see that there is that community support, which we know there is, and we know that the local community is very supportive. We often have people who just arrive and say that they're supporting or come and drop off items or come by and ask questions, and there's a really good balance in communication and sharing of the park between park users and people who are sheltering in the park. So those are all different actions that can be taken. Of course, showing up at the rally on Thursday, again, that's not something that is in everyone's capacity, but whatever those actions, if there are further actions, then those will be publicized as well. The decision probably won't happen this week. There might be something scheduled later, so we would be sharing that as well. Obviously, we hope that there isn't a decision, an eviction that happens right before the holidays. It just sort of seems to be piling on more things that are just so reprehensible on top of the other with inclement weather and the holidays approaching. To have this eviction happening possibly right now would just be not something I wouldn't believe could happen, but just sort of beyond any kind of reason.
Yeah, right. Like beyond belief.
Yeah, beyond belief.
I really
not
hope.
Quite. Not quite.
Yeah, I really hope it doesn't happen. It would be like so stupid and crazy if it did. But what is it's just crazy. Like, so you have like these bodies, like the Parks Board that is forcing this down. And, they also have the capacity to help in many other ways. It's just really crazy that they've chosen this way. Fiona, I don't know what else to say other than hang in there and our love to you all. And thanks for doing this work that you do. Thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you with some gifts really soon.
Thank you so much, Alnoor. I really appreciate it.
Okay, take care. So that was Fiona York, and you are still listening from unceded Coast Salish territories. We are going to be taking some musical breaks, and then we're going to be coming back with The Rational. We're going to be speaking with Jeff Berner, and we're going to be having a listen from Dalia Almarsri's remarks to the Vancouver School Board of Vancouver District. Stay tuned, you are still on CFRO.
The Halusa Nation, the human beings, the people, see the spiritual in the natural through sense and feeling. Everything is related. All the things of earth and in the sky have spirit. Everything is sacred. Confronted by the alien nation, the subjects and the citizens see the material religions through trauma and numb. Nothing is related. All the things of the earth and in the sky have energy to be exploited. Even themselves, mining their spirits into souls sold. Into nothing is sacred, not even their self. The Alai Nation, Alien Nation.